Hello everybody, my name is Pickpo. Today we're going to be doing a reaction. Actually, we're going to be reaction to a video by Brodie Robertson called Never Criticize the Linux Foundation Expenses. Let's begin, shall we? This is actually second take of this video, but let's hope we can make it below 1 hour. So, I already have video prepared. Let's hit the play button.
Honest question. When did it become taboo to criticize the Linux Foundation? I remember a couple of years back when people saw the Foundation report was being made on a Mac and everyone was like, haha, look at that, they're called the Linux Foundation.
It never became taboo, and this is actually a really stupid one because, honestly, best tool, use right tool for right job, right? That's the whole thing, whole my shtick. So the fact that Linux Foundation allows their graphics team to use tools that they're most familiar with is not a bad thing, it's a good thing. Yeah, sure, they're used to macOS tools and Windows tools, but who cares?
But they don't use Linux. Isn't that funny? And everyone just had a laugh and everyone joked about it. Now, credit where credit is due, the Linux Foundation is the biggest employer of Linux kernel developers. Without this money, the project simply would not be viable at its size and at its scope. There are a lot of people outside of this that do work on the kernel, but the key kernel maintainers are paid by the Linux Foundation.
Yes.
However, this is not the only thing they support, and this is no secret whatsoever. It's not even the main thing they support. Linux kernel development is about 2 to 3% of the funding, depending on the year. That number is correct, but there are some inaccurate numbers that do get spread around from time to time about how the rest of their money is spent. And I've absolutely been at fault for spreading this around myself because I just didn't know the numbers were inaccurate. So you'll sometimes see a graph that looks like this, and you'll see 4% blockchain, 12% AI, machine learning, so on and so forth, and all of these other branches that make it look like this is how much the rest of their funding is being spent, because...
No, it doesn't. Because, yes, of course, it gives you some percentages. Problem is you're not given the context. Project technical segment. So... what it really is, it's how many projects in percentage values, it's a relative value of projects are in certain technical segment. It has nothing to do with how much money they spend on them or anything like that. Problem is, if you don't have that context with it, which in the document it appears, actually there is, you're not gonna you can use that for anything you want. So if I contextualize it differently, like how many percentages, of course people are gonna believe it because they won't go look to the primary source. So that's how these kind of problems start to arise when you do not look at primary sources, only to the secondary sources like media.
12% AI, machine learning, so on and so forth, and all of these other branches that make it look like this is how much the rest of their funding is being spent, because you do see that 2% there for Linux, so it's very...
Now on the left side we see a expenditures graph for 2023. I believe it's from the same report, but I'm not sure, but there you go. Now, yeah, they have about the same number, but there is no correlation between graph on the left and graph on the right. That's simply it, even though one of the numbers is the same or similar.
Very easy to make that connection between the two graphs. That's not exactly how it goes, though. So instead, there is a separate graph that shows their expenditures. This has Linux kernel development at 2 to 3% depending on the year. And in 2023, the project support was at 64%. Now,
This is
how
the
that
problematic
64%
part.
gets divvied up amongst the things on the other graph is not entirely clear. We do know that these are the categories they are supporting. We just don't know if they're all weighted equally, and it's very possible they're not. There's not really any clear indication in the rest they're reporting exactly how the numbers are split up. So these numbers absolutely are up for debate. What is not up for debate is how much they spend on Linux kernel development. This is crystal clear in their expenditures, and this is a very small part of what they spend.
Based on my research, what does projects get by joining the Linux Foundation? I forgot to tell about that. From my research, they get governance, so that's an important part. They get access to some infrastructure and collaboration between different projects and so on. So those are actually important things to have as a project and should not be discounted as a bad thing or a good thing. But as we're gonna see in the rest of the video, all of these projects are server projects, which means how they affect other areas of Linux.
This has led some people like Rene.
Oh yeah, server and embedded. I always forget about it. That's my bias. I'm biased towards server and desktop more than embedded, so I have to always correct myself.
The developer of T2SDE to say things like this.
I said this before. The Linux Kernel Foundation, you've seen this in their own stats. They have here only 3% or so on Linux kernel, right? Like everything else, they spend 97% on random bullshit because they are the random bullshit foundation.
As we already established, his numbers there are wrong. It's 2 to 3.
They're not random bullshit foundation. All of these projects, in general, talking about close to, let's say, most of them, if not all, are furthering Linux in some way. They're meant for embedded Linux. They're meant for server Linux. Yes, there aren't many, if any, desktop Linux applications, but there are many server Linux applications. Where all the money is, where all the actual benefits of Linux are. Oh well.
2 to 3% on Linux, and then not 97% on random other things, but 64%. But the main point still holds true. I also want to make it clear that a lot of what the Linux Foundation is spending money on is going to a good cause. I am not here to say, oh, look, the Linux Foundation is burning money on random things that don't matter. They spend money on things like the Open 3D Foundation, RISC-V, Automotive Grade Linux, the Open Voice Network, GraphQL, Open Power. But let's take this out.
He didn't mention the biggest one of them all, CNCF, at least in my opinion, which basically, those who do not know, Cloud Native Computing Foundation is probably the biggest project under the Linux Foundation, maybe even bigger than Linux kernel. It depends on Linux kernel, but it is by itself really huge. I know that things like Kubernetes are run under it, after all. So it has to be huge.
Out of the tech context for a second and look at it in another context. Let's say you have the Feed Hungry Kids in Uganda Foundation, and then they say, okay, we're going to start digging wells in the Congo. That is also doing incredible work, and that is amazing. But maybe you're not the Feed Hungry Kids in Uganda Foundation anymore. Maybe you're the Help People Who Need to Be Helped Foundation. And back to the Linux.
As many times as I heard this analogy, I believe that would be called, many times I found it weird. It's not the name that defines what do you do as a foundation. It's the mission statement. So the fact that whatever that example is, it doesn't mean that you cannot do anything else. outside of the what your name says, whether it be Linux Foundation, whether it be any other foundation. If your name says something, that doesn't mean that everything else you cannot do. Especially if it some way furthers your actual goal, your mission statement. But okay.
Linux Foundation, if that's what they want to do, that's okay. They can do whatever they want with their funding. However, I am well within my right to be critical of how the Linux Foundation is operating, and the fact that I really wish the Linux Foundation spent money on the Linux desktop.
Okay, and I have a question. So, if they're not, if they shouldn't do random things like other things, why they should spend on Linux desktop? It's a random other thing. Because right now they're spending on Linux server. I believe that it could be said that Brodie has more aptitude or more likeness to Linux desktop, therefore he doesn't find other areas. Has more of a bias against other areas like embedded, like server, like I have towards embedded, because I completely forget it at times. But that's my opinion, so I could be wrong. But since he's primarily desktop guy, as far as I know, he could be forgetting that other areas also exist and that Linux Foundation funds those areas quite nicely and gives them infrastructure and so on.
Stop. And having this opinion may have started a bit of an argument over on Twitter with Richard Brown, the maintainer of...
I saw that fight, that Twitter debate. Problem is that in the original tweet, he never actually mentions Linux desktop. He just mentioned that that Linux Foundation puts money towards other things, not Linux kernel. He actually goes to the wish for Linux desktop quite later.
Of OpenSUSE Aeon. OpenSUSE Aeon, formerly known as MicroOS Desktop. OpenSUSE's immutable GNOME desktop. Now, to be fair with the argument, I kind of feel like he started it by making this remark before, but hey, let's just say that I started it for the sake of argument. Now, I want to be clear that I don't hate Richard, he might hate me, I don't know, it's his life, he can have whatever opinion he wants. But also, do not go and contact him, that's weird, don't be weird. The Linux Foundation exists to serve the interests of its members, linking to the members page, and they already employ the vast majority of kernel devs.
That is also true. Let's not forget that at the end of the day, members decide where the money should go. Especially board of directors.
In the world, implementing the features they want. On this list, you're going to see companies that you've absolutely heard of, like Intel, Huawei, Hitachi, Microsoft, Oracle, Qualcomm, Google. Why is Google not a platinum member? I don't know. Anyway, a bunch of other companies you've probably heard of, and going down the list, some that you may have heard of depending on what space you exist in, others which you probably have never heard of before. So those members want their membership dues being spent in areas where it's less effective for them all to spend individually. Investigating blockchain, ML, whatever the next trend might be, is a good use of Linux Foundation money. More kernel spending ain't needed by the members of the Linux Foundation.
Yes. And the catch is that they need to spend that money. And yeah, investing in things that are future is actually a lot easier when you're actually pulling money together onto a neutral third party like Linux Foundation. And Linux Foundation at the same time ensure that those projects that money is pulled to, they put money into, run on Linux. Or at least I believe that's what they do. Or I get that, or it's open source, at least for most part, and all that. Like, it benefits everybody.
Now, I don't know how this information started getting spread around, but yes, this is correct. They do absolutely spend money on blockchain development. For example, they own and founded and run the Hyperledger Foundation. Also, in their 2023 report, they specifically funded the Open Wallet Foundation. These are just two very notable mentions. Going back to what I said before, 4% being the number on blockchain, and then 12% being the number on machine learning, those are inaccurate. But the number is absolutely not 0. Ignore this highlighted segment here. This is one I'd not been corrected on the blockchain number yet, but the rest of this is still relevant. I personally don't see the value in spending that money on blockchain development and machine learning, and would prefer to see it spent improving the existing Linux ecosystem.
Well, it is improving the existing ecosystem by adding new features to it and expanding for what it can be used. It's improving server part of the ecosystem and improving your phones and improving general user experience, I guess.
Not just those two categories, blockchain and machine learning, but a lot of the other random
and again embedded. Again, forgot embedded
things funded by the Linux Foundation. Again, a lot of these are really, really good projects. But why is the Linux Foundation funding them? I know it's because the members of the Linux Foundation want their dues being spent on that project.
Also because they are a Linux Foundation project. That means they are part of Linux Foundation. That's why. There are ways you can access. And why are there not many Linux desktop projects part of Linux Foundation? That should be the question we should ask projects, not in Linux Foundation. Do they apply? First of all, do they apply? Then why they do not get accepted, and so on and so on and so on.
But why is that being done through the Linux Foundation? There are other foundations specifically for those things they want to work on. The Linux...
Yes, Hyperledger Foundation, which is a Linux Foundation project, or a foundation owned by Linux Foundation.
Linux Foundation literally has Linux in its title.
Again, that doesn't matter. Doesn't matter what is the title of your foundation. Mission statement matters much more.
Love to see the Linux Foundation chuck a few million at KDE, GNOME, Wayland Development, XDG Portals, libinput, which is severely undermaintained. This is a key part to doing input on a Linux system, and there's basically no one that maintains it. There's like a very small number. And these other aspects of the Linux desktop that we all use and could all greatly benefit from more funding. Now, considering that Richard runs OpenSUSE Aeon, he probably doesn't disagree with my point that these projects need more funding. But he does disagree with what I'm saying about the Linux Foundation. Unless you're a sponsoring member, unless you're actually paying the Linux Foundation, your opinion of how the Linux Foundation spend their money is utterly irrelevant. And none of those things are in the business interest of the Linux Foundation's membership. Why should the Linux Foundation waste their sponsors' money on topics that don't interest their sponsors? Why?
Yeah, that's one thing. The other, in general, Linux desktop is a relevant topic for most people. It isn't all that powerful. It isn't all that of a market force. At best, there is 4%, at best, of users, and most of them are Ubuntu.
Why do you think you have a right to declare how anyone else spends their money? He is correct that I don't have the right to force them to change how they spend their money or demand they change how they spend at the threat of, I don't know, violence or something. But I absolutely do have the right to have an opinion on the way that any project operates. They don't have to...
Important things is how you word it, and I'm not sure it was worded properly. At least the first tweet wasn't worded the best.
Listen to me, and they probably won't. But I absolutely have the right to have an opinion on it. I'm sure you also have opinion on things you're not personally involved in. To which he gives the pedantic answer that the Linux Foundation isn't a
Yes, that was a nitpick.
project, which is not my point. Yes, I know it's a foundation, it's in the name. That's not the point I was making there. It doesn't change what I was saying. Foundation, company, project, I feel the same way about all of them. Nobody has to listen to my opinion, but I do have the right to have it and the right to say it. I personally work really hard to avoid crossing the line between criticism of what other people are doing and making demands of what folk do with their time and money. I think you cross the line, and I find that distasteful.
I share that opinion with Richard in regards to the original tweet.
Which he didn't define how that's what I'm doing here at all, because that's not what I'm doing. I am literally providing criticism, like he's providing criticism. Yeah, as I said, do not contact him. He's an overworked maintainer, probably...
Yeah, it's important to note. Yeah, do not contact any people that are criticized or talked about in this video, which includes Richard Brown, which includes Brodie. Maybe subscribe to Brodie if you find this kind of video interesting for them. Also subscribe to me. But please do not just attack Brodie for the fact that he made a video where he was, at least in my opinion, wrong.
Really stressed out and lashing out at people because that's what people do on the internet. Also, he is absolutely right that the Foundation exists to serve what their members want. That's true. My issue is what their members want. I would not want to become a member.
They want for Linux Foundation to fund projects that make business sense for them and for Linux Foundation, which are projects that run on Linux and are primarily of embedded and server nature, because those are the established ecosystems, in also which they dabble and gain money from Linux.
A member of the Linux Foundation just to have an opinion on how they spend their money, and I don't think anybody,
of course, that's stupid,
else should become a member either. If you want to support the development of Linux, the Linux Foundation is one of the worst ways that you can spend your money. Find a developer on a project.
But not because of that, because you would already be a fish, a small fish in the pond that wouldn't actually make that much wave. Now, if there was another foundation for Linux Desktop where things like GNOME, KDE were housed under, that would make a lot more sense to donate to. But even then, you'd probably be a small fish. Why? Because the large groups who do work on Linux Desktop would already donate far more money than you ever could.
Project you like. Find a project you like and support the project directly. Find a kernel developer. Find, I don't know, some single issue foundation, or at least a foundation that is not stretched as much as the Linux Foundation.
Linux Foundation isn't stretched at all.
Whether it's the EFF, whether it's the FSFE or FSF, or I don't know.
And then he provides examples of those foundations as not stretched compared to Linux Foundation. Come on, man. Those aren't. I wouldn't want to donate to FSF or FSFE anyway. I really don't want those foundations to be a thing anymore because, well, it's FSF. I'm not a big fan of FSF as it is. Let's not go into that can of worms, and let's continue with this video.
I don't know, the RISC-V Foundation directly. Find a place where you know where your money is going to go, and find a place where you know it is actually going to have an impact on the things that you care about. We constantly talk on the Linux desktop about how underfunded so many projects are. Going back to the tweet before, KDE.
But that isn't because the Linux Foundation doesn't give money to them. It's because we as Linux users don't care about donating. And it has to start with us. Guess what? The companies that donate to Linux Foundation are, for all intents and purposes, users. Yeah, they're much larger users, but they're users nonetheless.
KDE, GNOME, Wayland development, XDG portals, libinput. But not just those. All of these random little libraries that nobody even knows about, that holds your desktop up and actually makes it viable. It's maintained by one person. You know, cases like XZ, before XZ was co-opted. This only happened.
Yeah, but that's the effect of open source. Simple as that. That's the effect of open source. Which is also like Linux desktop is an effect of open source. But the fact that we have one developer working on a project, just one developer, no, in no larger structure, is an effect of an open source project. And that will always be a thing. So yes, I agree. Please donate the money. As I said on last podcast episode, I'm part of a podcast called NTA, Not Tax Allowed. Please check them out. Please check it out. Link in the description down below. Just like there'll be for this video down below in the original tweet. I am of the opinion that we should stop being aggressive against projects and developers who ask for money. Why? Because and the fact that they're doing a hobby project is taking time out of their lives, which you could spend much more effectively. So why shouldn't they ask for a donation or I don't know what, some kind of monetary recompense? Wanna know why? It's very simple. Because they might be doing the exact same thing that they do at work. Just on the same project. They might be developers at work. Why wouldn't we want them to cut hours at their work and put time into just that one project or their open source work? We would save them so much time, and we would save them from burnout. XZ might not have happened if the developer of XZ, the original developer of XZ, wasn't burned out. And maybe donations would have helped. Who knows? But even if project like XZ was part of a larger foundation, the issue with XZ would be harder to catch, because there will always be people who would be able to check the code or do a code review and stuff like that. And that's why I think more projects should be part of foundations, whether it be foundations of equal-minded people or just larger foundations like Linux Foundation, or maybe we should have a Linux desktop foundation, which could be part of Linux Foundation after all, but we should have some sort of Linux desktop or open desktop foundation or something to that effect. It would make make work for these people much easier, because what would the foundation provide? Project governance, better ability to accept donations and other funding avenues. Did I say governance? Yes, it's a governance. Infrastructure. Just simple code reviewers and people who could in interim replace you for you, whether it be at I don't know, where you be burn out, you need some time, or anything else. People could replace you for short amounts, whether it be developers who work on another project, or just other people who could be governed by the foundation instead of by you when you're gone. And things like exit would be much harder to happen. Not impossible, just harder.
Because the maintainer was burnt out, and didn't have other people working on the project and wasn't getting funded for it and just didn't want to work on it anymore. That whole situation would have been mitigated if it was a well-supported project.
Yeah.
And every
Agreed.
single developer that operates in the Linux space that isn't already employed by some major company who is just doing this because they want to have fun.
Even those who are employed by major companies do it because they want to have fun. And maybe we should help them out. Again, maybe we should help them out by donating, therefore cutting down hours, and therefore having more time and more mental capacity for their passion project instead of their work. Because believe me, doing this for more than 8 hours a day is a pain already. Have to do it for 12, 15 hours a day with a personal project can be a really hard thing and really mentally taxing.
Every single person agrees with this issue. They agree that we need more funding.
I disagree with the fact with how you frame it with Linux Foundation, but I do agree with the fact sometimes I speak like I'm talking to him instead of about him. So that's why this is my first React video. But I do agree with him that this is an issue. The funding is an issue. I don't agree with about his opinion with Linux Foundation. I do agree with that Linux Desktop needs more funding.
We need more support. But somehow, it is not okay to call on the foundation that calls itself the Linux Foundation to maybe move a little bit of money.
Yeah. Because there are other things in Linux than just desktop. I don't know if you know that.
Not 100 million, not 50 million, but maybe like, I don't know, 1 million a year, 2 million a year off of projects like blockchain development, AI, web development, DevOps, cloud, containers, visualization.
Very important fields for Linux, because those are the fields where Linux grows, not desktop. Desktop is stagnant. We had a little bit of growth, but honestly, in the grand scheme of things, Linux desktop is stagnant until some major changes happen. And yeah, we need money for those changes to happen. But that's the same chicken and egg problem with desktop applications and their availability on Linux.
And give some of that money to the people who are trying to make the Linux desktop a viable platform. I know the Linux Foundation does not care at all about the Linux desktop, and that's the problem, right? Like, imagine for a second if we had a foundation like the Linux Foundation backing the Linux desktop.
I already gave the idea of Linux Desktop Foundation. Brodie, maybe you should start it. Of course, now it's a lot of work, but yeah, Linux desktop projects banding together would be a really good thing, especially if those projects were from myriad of fields, like, I don't know, development, video editing, multimedia, other multimedia, this, that, like all from all around, like desktop environments, all that would make for a good foundation. But it would have the same problem at the end of the day, because you would still see multimedia, I don't know, text editing, whatever, text manipulation, blah, 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 all the different areas. That would be segments, technical segments, still.
We wouldn't have situations like the GNOME Foundation and the KDE Foundation where they can afford a couple of full-time developers and they can do some contract work and they can have some interns. And
so maybe they should combine it to Linux Desktop Foundation to have more money and potentially then become part of, and then try to become Linux Foundation project.
And some things like that, but they can't have a big development force behind these projects and
Again, this is my opinion, and therefore, who knows?
instead, the development on these projects is primarily done by companies outside of these foundations, and we have the Linux Foundation.
Yes, but for every Linux Foundation project, most of the development work is done by groups, companies outside of Linux Foundation. Linux Foundation provides things like governance, especially in the open source part, and infrastructure, and ways to communicate for contributors, especially those who aren't part of said companies or Linux Foundation, and so on. Really important things. And one of the things that really does Linux desktop in general, open source projects don't have is good governance. Things like project managers and so on.
Foundation here, all of this funding, and I don't think it is wrong to call on the foundation and call on foundation partners to maybe divert a little bit of money to supporting the Linux desktop. Nobody has to take my opinion seriously, and nobody in a position of power is likely going to do so. But it doesn't change the fact that this is how I feel about the Linux Foundation. And this is not a new opinion I hold. And this is not some like weird fringe opinion that nobody out there has except like 3 or 4 people. I have heard very similar sentiments made by tons of people on the Linux desktop. But nothing is going to change. It would be nice if it changed. But hey, we can only work with what we've got. At least there are really cool companies out there like Valve actually supporting Linux desktop. At least there are companies, I know people sometimes don't like them, at least there are companies like Red Hat working on desktops like GNOME. At least there are companies selling PCs like System76 and developing their own desktop. It's not like there's nothing out there, but I certainly wish there was more. But what do you think? Let me know your thoughts in the comment section down below. Would you like to see more support from the Linux Foundation? Do you think that what the Linux Foundation is doing now is perfectly fine?
Yes, it is perfectly fine.
And that's okay. I would love to know. Let me know down below. So if you like the video, go like the video. And if you really like the video and you want to become one of these amazing people over here, check out the Patreon, Scribes, LiberaPay, linked in the description down below. That's going to be it for me, and let's play the clip again.
Okay. So, what does that mean, really? That Brodie is wrong, and that Linux Foundation does support into Linux, just not Linux desktop. Now, just for a few examples before I finish, few examples of Linux desktop, Linux Foundation projects. OpenTofu, which is an open fork, so fork of Terraform, a well-known infrastructure tooling for servers, which went source available a couple of months ago, maybe close to a year. I don't remember when. Terraform, amazing piece of software made by HashiCorp, but HashiCorp decided they're going to do source available, which kinda killed all the contributions. So, and there were people who didn't want to use it anymore. So some people decided to fork the last open source version into OpenTofu. Another such project is, of course, recently created Valky, which is an open source fork of now source available Redis, which is in its own way a controversy, how it went from open source to source available. So there are others, again, CNCF, Hyperledger Foundation, OpenJS, OpenSSF, I believe, and so on. And so all of those do get some benefits from Linux Foundation, of course. So, what did you think? Again, do not go and harass subjects of this video. And if you like this type of content and would like to see some more of me doing React, subscribe and press the like button. Also go and like Brodie's video. All the links for the video, the original tweet, and other stuff that I'll put in the description down below, where you can also find the link to my podcast, No Tax Allowed. Thank you guys for watching. Don't forget to like, subscribe, comment, and don't forget, right tool, right job. Goodbye.